Up next, we've got Dan and the team to talk about multi-platform of Black Country Radio and Black Country Extra. I'm just going to load your presentation up.
We're on.
Marvellous.
Are we on? There we go. Thank you. It's about being at Wembley, isn't it? Hello. Thank you for sticking around to have a listen to us. Thank you, Martin. We were really conscious when we put this together that we didn't want it to be a massively formal stand-up, talk about how great we are type presentation. So it's, from our point of view, very informal, and I think will lead hopefully quite nicely onto the presentation afterwards or the discussion afterwards about the future of radio. But we just wanted to highlight a few of the things that we've done. I know a few people that have walked around have asked some questions about Extra and how that works. So we've drafted in Billy, who is over there not in his cap anymore, in his cap, who by hook or by crook has ended up being the person who predominantly programs Extra, works with the teams that present shows on there. So we'll introduce his Billy in a second. Keith is hanging around as well to talk a bit about sport. Roy was going to come and talk to you about sport, but obviously he's on air at the moment presenting some, and so can't. Clive, who is sitting... Well, I'll let you introduce yourself, Clive, because it seems a bit awkward
Clive.
if I...
No, I present four programs each week. I've got 3 episodes of Drive Time and 1 Friday evening program, which goes out later, and it's more of a sort of late-night topical discussion program. So we'll deconstruct items and issues that you can't put on daytime programming. So we'll look at really sensitive stuff. So quite a diverse amount of programming. Drive Time is much the same as anybody else's drive time, but I break the 3 hours down into single-hour segments, so there's something different each hour that keeps people engaged. So that's largely me, and I keep turning up to things like this, and I come and
Can't stay away.
I come and do OBs with you, don't I?
Yeah, never invited, but you
No,
want to
never
know you
invited.
are.
Never invited. I turn up to the opening of an envelope, you know.
Yeah, generally speaking. I'd tell you about me, but I've got
Go
a
on,
really,
tell them
really
about you.
horrific picture in the programme. Thank you for that, Martin. And a bit about me in there. So thank you, Nate. It is my Twitter profile. I do put it out there, but
It's his Tinder profile, actually.
don't tell the wife. And then leaning against the wall over there is Zilla, who's our marketing director, and is around to answer questions or anything along those lines. And Tom, who's disappeared into the audience over there, is our technical director and is also available, whether it be now or afterwards, to chat about that sort of stuff. So we were just really conscious that we wanted to give you a bit of an introduction to the station, and for anybody that came a little bit later, I know Keith did one this morning, but just to give you quite a brief overview for anybody who came along and didn't hear that. We started existence as 2 separate radio stations. So one was called The Bridge, which was based in Stourbridge. That broadcast on FM and online, and was a relatively standard commercial model. There was nothing massively different about it, much like a lot of other stations that are out there. There was another station called Black Country Community Radio as well, which existed purely online, and then got a DAB licence to broadcast on the multiplex that Switch managed through Dean. And we, for a variety of reasons, looked at the 2 models and decided there wasn't necessarily a need for 2 very similar stations in the Black Country. It's a very proud population. It's a population that wants to have something it can hang its hat on, almost. So the 2 were merged together, and Black Country Radio was born a few years back, and has developed over the course of time from The Bridge's humble beginnings in a church. That's your picture, Paul, just at the top up there, looking lovely. An interesting area to try and broadcast in, a big stone building. It doesn't lend itself particularly well to sound. But also a very sort of iconic building within the Stourbridge skyline, so one that a lot of people recognised, and one that was a bit quirky and a little bit unique, but was our home, and we loved it in a lot of ways. Not quite as sexy nor singing nor dancing as here, but as I was saying to somebody that we were talking to earlier, I think the important thing was that people that were listening didn't necessarily realise that. And I think in a lot of ways, you can have the prettiest studios in the world or the roughest studios in the world, but at the end of the day, as long as the output that's coming out of them sounds great, it's the whole theatre of the mind thing. As long as it sounds good, that's the important bit. So off the back of that, we sort of got to the point that we're at today through a lot of sort of twisting and winding. And once we got the radio bit sorted, the next bit that was really important to us was to try and work out what more we could do off the back of that. And it sat at around the sort of time that radio was becoming quite visual. It was becoming quite adaptive in the way that it functioned. And it wasn't just a case of talking to a microphone. And I think for anybody that's looking at new technologies and ways that they can do things, the talking into the microphone bit is always going to be the crux of what we do. It's what separates us from TV and all those other industries. But the important thing was that we wanted to become a media broadcaster, not necessarily a radio station, not necessarily a TV station or an online station or anything like that, but a media broadcaster that took advantage of all the options that were out there for us. And that, as we'll come to in a second, was looking at alternative radio streams, but it was also looking at ways we could do things with the content that we were generating and the people that we were linking with and the communities that we were talking to that went over and above that. Because actually, it's not always the case that Barbara that's picking the kids up from school can listen to you in the car because her kids might want to listen to, try and sound cool now, I don't know, like BTS or Dua Lipa, that'll do. Dua Lipa's new album. But what we didn't then want was Barbara to miss all the stuff that we were talking about and the stuff we were doing, because actually it was still important to her. So we had to try and figure out different ways that we could do things, different ways that we could adapt our output. And one thing we were always also really conscious of was that we're not in a unique position in this area. We're up against lots of other broadcasters that all want a piece of that pie as well, and generally have a lot more money to spend on getting their piece of that pie. And we've got a really saturated landscape where we are. That's a handful of them: Heart, Greatest Hits, Smooth, Free, Capital, WM. That's not to mention some other community stations, some online stations, some not wholly legal stations, national stations, all that sort of stuff. So, we're always going to have competition, and I'm sure it's the case for some other people here as well. There's a massively saturated market, so we had to look at what we were doing and how we could do it differently. A lot of those broadcasters as well, like I say, have the remit, have the funds, have the presence of mind, and have the staffing, quite frankly, to take advantage of a lot of different options. We're never going to be in a position where we can employ, in whatever capacity you want to look at it, somebody to just look at a certain area of our station. It's never, well, I say never going to happen, not going to happen in the immediate future. Heart have teams of people that look after very specific areas of their station. So I guess we kind of had to look at what we wanted to do to broaden ourselves and broaden the platforms we had to offer, but work out a way we could do it differently, that we could afford to do, that would make an impact on the people that we were looking to serve. Like the guys were saying, just it's the stuff that we would love to do, but it's not necessarily that relevant to the people that are listening to the station or interacting with the station. So whilst it's great for our egos, it makes absolutely no difference to the people that are paying the bills. So off the back of that, one thing that we did look to do, this is your bit, Billy. You're on in a second. One bit we did look to do was to try and split what we do. I didn't change slides. There we go. To split what we do. So obviously Black Country Radio is a station which exists in quite a commercial way, as a lot of other stations do. But one thing, and Keith was saying this right back at the very start, that we looked to do and looked to develop was Black Country Extra, and to see what we could do there and how we could target different communities, both in terms of the output, but also in terms of the creation of radio as well. I'm going to let Clive and Keith do this bit, because I've done lots of... Clive and Billy do this bit, because I've done lots of talking and Billy knows lots about Extra.
Well, Billy, why don't you come and put some framework around Extra, and then I'll pick up after that. Do watch where you go. There. You've left your Zimmer at home, haven't you, again?
Well, the thing is, I've been busking in Alzo all morning, so if my voice is a bit hoarse, and if you don't understand some of the lingo, then we haven't got any translation, so you just have to...
Shall I do sign language?
Yeah, you have to do sign language or something, really. Well, I suppose Extra was Keith's idea, Keith's vision, and it was basically, the initial idea was based on the programme that I do on Black Country Radio Sunday afternoons called the Honour and Change Show. And the Honour and Change Show was born many, many years ago when the radio station was split, and Dave Brownhill, who's not here at the moment, asked if I'd go down and do a programme, because I write and perform in dialect, do a lot of community work, worked at Aston University doing projects on oral histories and voice. So I went down and did this programme with this chap, and at the end of the programme I said, do you want to do a radio programme? And I went, well, are you joking? And he says, yeah, you can do it. And I said, well, the only way I would do one is if it was totally based on the region, and if it only played music or poetry or stories from people of the region. And they said, yeah, all right then. And I said, I'm not touching that, which was the desk. So they ran it there for a few years, and it was on at 1 o'clock in the morning or something. We came over to Black Country Radio. It initially started as a one-hour show, and Keith's vision really was to expand on that and find a platform for the community. Keith knew that I had a lot of connections with a lot of community groups locally, so I was inadvertently asked if I'd come to one of the board meetings, and I went, and Keith was going, yeah, and Billy knows loads of folks, so he can sort it out for extra. So, I was sort of conned really into starting it. And it really is a different beast to probably anything that you've done before, because what we had to do was we had to contact local groups, invite them to come and have a look, discuss what our vision was in relation to what their vision would be, and then trying to find out a way of implementing that. And to name a few, we've got Mary Stevens Hospice. We've got a community group called Pom Poms, which deals with loneliness with adults. We've got AA, and we've got Al-Anon, the alcohol support group. Then we've got St Mickey's School Students' Union come to do it. We've got a programme where under 12s run their own programme. Then we've got a classic car show, we've got a gardening show. We have got some music shows, but in a way, the idea is to fill it with community groups. Now, we could have gone to them and said, these are the rules. These are the rules you've got to abide by for you to have a programme. But very early on, we found that wasn't going to happen, because you had the ones that were technically apt, and they would come in and they'd see the studio and they'd go, I want to run the desk. I want to do that. And we said, look, if you've got a member of your organisation that you think will be able to run the desk, we'll give you a bit of training, and then you do everything. You host the show, you choose the music for the show, you run the desk. All we'll do is allocate your spot per week. Then we had others that we knew would never want to run the desk, so we would silently run the desk for them to host the show. And really, it's an open book. We have a group called Discover You that's a sort of workshop for disadvantaged kids, people with kids with autism, Down syndrome. And the guy that runs it, we had a lengthy conversation to say, you ain't running the show. If you're going to do it, they run the show. And he said, but some of them have real difficulty speaking, and couldn't care less. And we have one lad who comes and he doesn't speak at all. So he programs what he wants to say into his little laptop, and we prompt him, and then we put the speaker on, and he speaks into the laptop speaks into the speaker through his laptop. And the essence is, with Extra, you move into their world, and you have to be as flexible as possible. And you have to understand their needs, really. So you don't work from, although you've got a framework, you tend not to work from a framework. You work to how they want to feel part of it and claim ownership of that hour or 2 hours. And also there was a problem with, it's not structured like Black Country Radio, because some of them want to do a programme every week. Some of them want every fortnight. Some of them only want to do one a month. Some want to do one now and again. So you have to sort of try and work that into your schedule, and how you would formulate, we've just been talking, how you would formulate a structure so that people will know when their shows are going out. And it's completely in flux all the time. I mean, tomorrow we've got 2 new groups to show around, 2 new social groups that want to show around. We've got somebody who wants to do a specialist programme on, I think it's rap music. So it's like an open book. You can't put yourself out there and say, this is a community radio station, and then you start saying, well, no, you can't do that. We'll say, yes, you can do it, and we'll help you as much as possible. Obviously, you've got to work within the limits. We can't have songs we're swearing on, you can't have people swearing on. But the content is your content. And to be perfectly honest, I think it's about 9 months, Keith, it's been going now.
We launched in June last year.
So it's a couple of years to our
Last year,
first year's
June,
anniversary.
yeah.
It's been a total learning process. Without the backing of the techie team and Dan and Zilla and the folks from Black Country Radio, we wouldn't have floundered, but it would have been much more difficult to do it, because every hiccup we had to go back to them, and they had to work twice as hard really to get it off the ground. But the bonus is now we've got a station that it's an absolute joy to sit there on the desk and listen to somebody's stories. You listen to somebody from AA that comes in and opens up and has probably never ever told that story before, and somebody out there of the AA family listens to that and it inspires them. You come in and you've got a Down syndrome kid. In fact, Thursday, Discover You came to do their weekly show, and a young lad came up to me, Down syndrome lad, after the show, and he says, I want to ask you something. And I said, go on then, you know, what do you want? He says, I want to do my own show. Now, he has problem talking, but I just said, yeah, right, somehow we'll get round it. I'll talk to Steve, you talk to your mum and dad. Somehow we'll put your show together, but it's got to be your show. You've got to pick the music, you've got to tell us what you want to put in that show, and we'll support you. And I think it's, been an eye-opener as to what's out there. I think there's about 60, 70 groups now involved in it, and increasing all the time. And we have had people leave because it hasn't been what they want, and that's fine, you know. And we have had people adapting the shows. What we normally say is, look, we know you're really enthusiastic. Start with 1 a month. If you feel you're comfortable, you can do 2, do 2. If you want to do weekly, but we'll give you a permanent spot and we'll repeat your monthly show on that day at the same time until you come and do another one. Because at the moment it's only on the phone app and online. It'll shortly be on DAB. But it's built a community within a community. You know, each show has got its own community. Classic Cars get emails from New Zealand and Brazil, from their community, that listen to their programme, and then they overlap to another programme. So eventually, and I think when it goes on DAB, the whole thing will become its own community. You know, it's like organic. It just becomes a community of itself, and I think it's shown the solidarity of my region, of our region, the Black Country, and what unbelievable stories there are out there that probably couldn't get onto mainstream. You might get 5 minutes on somebody's programme. You would never get an hour to tell the story of your life and your journey.
I think it's worth saying, Billy, that when we started it, we knew it wouldn't look like in 12 months what it looked at the beginning.
No.
But we also gave that sort of deadline, hopefully on DAB, to say, right, in 12 months' time, we'll be able to publish a schedule. Because at the moment we can't. It's a bit ad hoc. But we think we'll be able to do it, don't we?
Well, we've just been talking with Zilla about working a regular schedule.
I work with Billy on it, but it's Billy that's driven it, and it's a huge applause to Billy who ended up in his lap. Cunning plan, and it's been brilliant. Thanks, Billy. It's been
pleasure.
Fab.
Yeah, and there's a massive team now. Maz is in the office now, who deals with all the technical aspects of it. Oh, she's there, and Megan and Mike, and it's just become an animal of its own. And it's just a joy to work on it. It really is.
Thank you, Billy.
Thank you, Billy. Do you want to go next about sport then?
Oh, no, it's down.
Oh, no, it's a me. Yeah, don't worry, don't worry. No, I think it's fair to say, from what Billy was saying, in a lot of ways, it's an absolute flipping nightmare, that radio station, and goes against every convention known to man. But it's also a dream in a lot of ways as well. Clive, I'm conscious you haven't spoken. Do you want to do a quick comparison to the main station?
Yes. Billy's already now just illustrated to you the diagnostics of Extra. Across our two networks, we actually have, I think, about 150 volunteers. That includes our board members, our senior management team as well, and our technical department. Did you know that about 94% of our output on Black Country Radio is live? So therefore 6% or thereabouts is voice track. Now there are sort of variations on that, because if some people are away on holiday, a program that is normally live would then become voice tracked for a limited period of time. So I'm working on a ballpark average here. On Extra, 97% of their output is voice tracked. And there are 3 shows that are live, again, with the odd exception, I think I'm probably fair in saying that, with Billy. And as Billy said, Extra gives community groups who have got commitments, flexibility, because if they voice track, they can come in as and when they can, voice track their program and go away. Some of them will voice track 5 or 6 programs in one go, and they're then just put in the schedule to go. And of course, it gives them the opportunity to be creative as well, as Billy has explained. But they're not experienced broadcasters, and there's a clue in the title, it is a community station. Both networks are community stations, so they're not necessarily professional broadcasters. So going on to Black Country Radio, having a percentage there of 94% of output being live is a great testament to our volunteers, because people have other day jobs, have other commitments. You all know that. It's the same with your own stations as well. We're also very fortunate with our news output, because yes, we take Sky News on the hour. That's through a 24-hour cycle, isn't it? We get Sky through the night as well. But we also deliver local news as well, and we deliver that 5 days a week, which is delivered hourly. So we have top-of-hour headlines, and then we have a more fuller bulletin at 7:30, and that's between 7:30 in the morning and 7 at night. We've got 4 regular duty newsreaders per week who work in a rotation basis, and we've got 4 additional people at the moment who are being tutored and sort of mentored to come up to standard. But the problem is with news, we tend to lose people to the larger networks. I'm sure you've had natural attrition through your stations, where you've lost people to the metropolitan stations, the BBC or whoever. But one of my friends who works at Radio WM, which is the BBC's local station here for the West Midlands, and we were talking last year, and he said to me, and he was talking from WM's perspective, and he said, do you know, we ought to be doing what you do. And I said, how do you mean? And Daz said, well, our stuff is so bland and it's very youth orientated, and it doesn't really dip into the communities of the West Midlands, and parts of Warwickshire, which is what we do. I mean, Extra is a perfect example of that. But Black Country Radio, as I see it now, reminds me of how the BBC used to be when I was there, which was when God was a boy, probably from the late 80s to the early noughties. And of course, the BBC is a very different animal these days. Commercial radio is as well. But across both networks, we have the ability to tap in. And again, I'll refer back to Billy. We have the ability to tap in to local things. And people want that locality. People want to hear their own road name mentioned, for example, or their own village hall, or whatever's happening. My drive time program is fairly, as I said at the beginning, very much like a normal drive time program, with items every hour. So I get this sort of 3-hour cycle. My Friday evening program, which is called Friday Night Clive, which we stole off Clive James, that, as I was saying at the beginning, deals with more sensitive issues that you can't do on a daytime program. And about 4 years ago, I had the charity Copperfield on, which is a great name for a breast cancer charity. And they came on to talk about awareness of breast cancer, principally in females. But one of the things I learned was that men can have breast cancer, because men do have some degree of breast tissue. And so we did this interview, which was about 35, 40 minutes long, all live, and that was it. We still run a public service announcement from Copperfield, don't we, I think? Basically raising awareness about breast cancer in both men and women. And some woman heard that, and she rung up the Johnny Cole Breakfast Show just because that was the show that was on air at the time. And she'd heard these announcements, she'd listened to my programme, and she checked herself and found something that wasn't quite right, got herself checked out, and thankfully alleviated actually getting breast cancer because they removed whatever nasties that were there. So that's one example of the ways that with programs like mine, it's like a piece of elastic. You have a choice. Elastic is stretchable. You can push it, but you must never cross it. So I will push the line, and I will, I'll tackle things that are quite controversial. Now, you asked somebody like the BBC to do that, not a hope in Moses. And a lot of commercial networks won't do that as well. So that's what makes Black Country Radio different. Now, you can tell from my voice, I'm not local. I live in Worcestershire. But I cut my teeth at Pebble Mill. And Tim Beach at the back there, you'll remember me and I remember you from the days when we both had hair. No, I know. I didn't like to say Tim, to be fair. But, Tim, I'm sure you'll get where I'm coming from, the old days, and the radio isn't like that now. But that's where stations like ours, and probably yours as well, can actually tap into that. Dan.
Just to throw a couple of extra bits in, because I'm conscious there's another quick session after this as well. The reason we pull these slides up is what Clive was saying about news, and just to sort of bring it back to that cross-platform conversation. One thing that's massively important to us that we found has grown ridiculously, especially over the last 2 years, is the importance to, and it goes back to what I was saying before about good old Barbara taking her kids to school and listening to Dua Lipa instead of the radio, who doesn't necessarily have the chance to consume information. What we've found, I would imagine it's probably the same with you guys as well, is that having a strong, certainly social media presence, also online in general presence, has worked wonders for us. And actually looking at how we create items as well and saying, do you know what, we could talk about this on the radio, but actually there's a lot more grounding for that on the website. There's a lot more grounding for that on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever it might be. Even TikTok potentially, but we've not particularly strayed into that area yet. But a few things that are on there. So that's Dudley Town Centre when there was a cardiac arrest that took place in one of the shops there and blocked off the town centre. One on the top left is one of the roads just outside Howells Owen where there was an incident involving a bus which blocked the entire road. One at the bottom is Adam, who's part of our sports team and also part of our political team, speaking to one of the former mayors of Dudley about an event that's going on. All of those had far more traction on social media because of the content we could put out, the way we could visualize it. The reach that it got was far superior to whatever it would have gotten on air. Absolutely, the stuff that was on air was important to point people towards it, but the response to that was huge online, and it made us, as we said back at the start, into far more of an informative service, a cross-platform media offering, rather than just saying, do you know what, all we do is sit inside these four walls with a microphone and talk about stuff and assume that's good enough. In a lot of ways, nowadays, it's not good enough for us to just do that. There's, a ridiculous reach. We not to sort of blow our own trumpet too much, but over the course of the pandemic, we became a little bit like the hyper-local repository for information about COVID, which is good and bad in many ways. And again, I would imagine it was the same for all your stations as well. We were the people, and we tend to find this quite a lot when there's something big happening locally. So if there's bad weather and schools are closed, if there's big issues on the roads, anything like that, all of a sudden, the need for a local station, not even just a community station, the need for a local radio station becomes ever more apparent. And sadly, whilst the stuff that people like Heart and Free do is great in its own way, it's not local enough and not informative enough because the person who's in Manchester Googling Stourbridge can't find out the information they need, whereas we can send somebody down the road to get that information, which for us is where the difference lies. So if we can get that information out in as many ways as possible, our social media reach was in the millions over the course of the last 2 years because of the pandemic, because it was the way that people consume that information. Even BBC Local weren't putting that much sort of niche information for Dudley because their broadcast area is the West Midlands. It's not hyper-local. A couple of other bits I just wanted to throw in. that's a few of the bits and bobs. One of the big things that we're really passionate about, and now that we've got a bit of extra kit and we can go out and do things in public again, is to get out and about as much as we can. So there's a lovely picture of Clive at the top there with a rock choir singing Christmas carols. But also a few other bits as well. So this bench here, this is a painted picture of Billy doing some of the busking for charity that he does. So Billy didn't mention it because he was being far too modest. How much money have you raised, Billy? £33,000 from singing with a guitar in town centres. And that's £33,000 which has gone, which wards at Russell's Hall? So Russell's Hall is the big hospital locally. Diabetes. So off the back of that, Halesowen Town Centre, which is one of the local town centres, has a number of these which have been painted by a local artist in a variety of different patterns. That one was done for Billy, for the busking setup. We've got our logo on the side, but it kind of wasn't about us. It was about that whole setup and the busking that went on. Interviews in town centres with Terry from Bake Off, making cakes and brandy snaps and stuff. Christmas lights in the bottom left-hand corner. It's the stuff that we get to do, and you guys get to do, and community stations get to do, that some of these big stations either don't do, or, let's be honest, don't do very well in a lot of cases. And it's having that connection with the community, but also working out how you can do that in different ways. One final one that I'm just going to get Keith to do, because Roy's asked very nicely, is just to touch multi-platform-wise on what we do with sport in the local area. It's a massive part of what we do at the weekends, but I'll let Keith just give you a quick once-over.
Say apologies from Roy, who's busy manning the desk on the Saturday afternoon show. He gave me a few notes there, and just say, the sports team, as I mentioned earlier on, we've about 15 reporters, and they cover all local games, both during the winter months, the local football and local rugby union. Happily, we don't do Speedo anymore. But we also take, as I said this morning, we take the national news about the sports team, particularly about our local teams, Wolves, the Baggies, the Blues and Villa, Alex. And what else did he say? Oh yeah, former members of the sports team have gone on to work for paid careers with the ITN, the FA, BBC, Premier Rugby, on the other side of the paper. Blah, 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 blah. So we run, as I said, we've got somebody in the studio and people ringing on the mobile phones, or use the Comrex, and then we link that up with IRN. I think that's about it in summary. I could have talked a lot more about it, but I'm very aware of time. Okay.
Yeah, very last bit, Martin. Very last one, I promise. So basically for us, the multi-platform thing was a bit of a two-way thing. It was a bit about what we can do in terms of social media, but that's something that across the sector I think is becoming more important, is becoming more prevalent, and how we can sort of push that forward and do different things. But also what Billy was saying about Extra, and how for us one of the really important things, certainly now and moving into next year, or the rest of this year and then into next year, is looking at how, whilst we can talk about the community, that's fantastic, and we can have a focus on the community and what they want. The next step for us really is about getting those members of the community into a room, and like Billy said, giving them a bit of free rein to talk about their organisation, because at the end of the day, Mary Stevens Hospice are always going to know far more and be able to talk more eloquently about what they do than we ever are if we're interviewing them. So two very different beasts in terms of the two stations, but ones that hopefully will evolve over the course of the next year.
I think as well, a very lovely person sent me a text the other night, and in so many other words, they said the future is bright. And the future it is, if you think about it. It's dazzling here with lots of fresh challenges, I think, that we're going to do. And we have the technology and the volunteers to do it. And I think we're very, very lucky. So,
fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, guys. Are there any questions? By the way, I think what you do with your Black Country Extra, I think, is fantastic, and I think it's inspirational. Everyone's running off quickly. I don't know what to say. Any questions at all? Oh, okay. Oh, trains. Okay. Thank you ever so much, guys. Give them another round of applause.